Welcome to the Intelligent Business Show, a podcast from Aberdeen discussing the latest trends to keep you and your business at the top of your class. And now, here's your host, Aberdeen's CMO in residence, Matthew Grant.
Hello and welcome to the Intelligent Business Show, the podcast that focuses on all the ways that organizations just like yours are using data to make their business more intelligent. I'm your host, Matthew Grant, CMO in residence here at Aberdeen. This week, we're speaking with Toby Bottorf, VP of Service and Experience Design at Continuum, a global innovation design firm. I had been starting to think that the definition of intelligence we've been working with on this show was too data intensive. Being familiar with Toby's writing and knowing him to be an avowed humanist, I invited him to the show to talk about the quant bias and alternative models of intelligence. Let's dive in. All right, Toby, well, welcome to the Intelligent Business Show. And it's nice actually to have you in the room. A lot of times we're doing this remotely, so to actually be able to see the person I'm talking to is a change. So the reason I invited you here, as we discussed before, was that, as I mentioned, it's called the Intelligent Business Show, and a lot of the guests we've had on are talking very specifically about data collection and using data to improve the enterprise across a number of functions. And I started to get kind of uncomfortable about that, because I think I was without really questioning it, I was automatically equating intelligence with a innovative or smart or whatever use of data. And I thought there are other models for intelligence that we should probably be thinking about. And so I invited you to be here on the podcast with us because I thought you might have a thought or two on that subject.
I do. Thank you for having me. It's good to understand the frame of reference because we are going to be talking a little bit outside of that frame.
Yes.
Data is really good for optimizing, but it's not good for everything. There's a lot of different ways of being intelligent. And sometimes what you're looking for is very different from optimization. If what you're looking to do is make a nonlinear leap, to think about an alternative path, an alternative future, data won't get you there. And so you need different kinds of, I wouldn't even call it data, different kinds of evidence for where the world is going. And oftentimes that's what our clients come to Continuum to ask us to help them do, is think about a future that's not linear. Things come out of left field, changes come from different places, and we try to understand people in a really qualitative way to come up with ideas that are going to live in the world on our clients' customers' terms.
So that's even the fact that you said that made me think that there was another sort of unquestioned assumption that I was making about data in the enterprise. So part of the way, like, for example, one of our guests does a lot of in monitoring, I guess, of the way people are spending time on the job, particularly on looking for what applications are they spending, are they opening most frequently, how much time are they spending when they open this or that application, stuff like that. So it was definitely looking at trying to figure out, the way they put it was, we want to show companies how work actually happens in the organization. So they're using data to capture something that's unknown about even their current state that they're living in. But what you're talking about, which I think is also how people kind of imagine data could be used, is how can I use what I'm seeing now, perhaps, to innovate my way into a future, or actually discover something that's not just unknown but doesn't exist yet.
Yeah. And so we're not experts in data, big or medium, but we are pretty good at expertise in people. We do a lot of ethnographic, in-context research, and I like using data as a starting point. It doesn't ask questions like the question why, but it does provide a really interesting read of what's currently happening. So I remember back in my early days of being a web designer, a little statistic like how much time people are spending on a specific page. That could mean that they are loving what they're finding there. It could mean that they're lost.
Right.
So we do our work is very interpretive, but even when you're dealing with quantitative data, that also requires interpretation. So when we start with data, what we're looking for is not answers, but starting points for questions. We examine data for mysteries, anomalies, and gaps, because kind of like a dark mark on an X-ray, that's the place where we want to go investigate a little further. And so we'll look deeper and use data sets and things that are mysterious or unresolved in a data set to inform what we're curious about when we go out and talk to people.
So can you tell me a story about that, like in the work that you at EPAM Continuum have been doing, where, like, what's an example of a mystery that looking at the data might help you uncover?
So we didn't start with data when we were doing this, but one of the big leaps that we helped a client take was when we were working with Procter & Gamble on Pampers. And they were losing ground on cost to Huggies, had fallen into second place. And the paradigm that everybody was chasing was past the point of diminishing returns. It was negative returns, frankly. Everybody was advertising, you remember the images of blue liquid being poured into something. And the diaper's load capacity was higher than any parent is comfortable with. You drop your kid off at daycare and it comes out weighing 5 pounds more. And you're like, wait a minute, did my kid get changed at all? And so that was not, that was an arms race that wasn't, nobody was going to win at that.
Right.
And what we came up with was a different model for how to design the diapers around parents' values. And we started to pick up evidence of this just when we were recruiting people to talk to. The conversations they had amongst themselves were all about my kid's development. And so we recognized that saying that a baby weighs 20 pounds, like, could be skinny, could be chunky at different ages. It's not the thing that matters.
Right.
So we started with modest changes just to packaging and language, and then realized that had was resonant for parents, and that could lead to, thinking about the whole line of diapers and changes to the shape in line with whether you're crawling or walking or starting to do toilet training.
Right.
It all came from understanding that what mattered to parents was not, does this thing leak, but where's my kid at in its development, his or her development?
Right. And is the diaper itself appropriate? Does it match that developmental level, or even help? Because I remember too, like when you're transitioning in the this kind of pull-ups and even the reusable diaper, if it hasn't met its, as you said, load capacity, which I hadn't. My kids are pretty grown up now, and I hadn't thought about diaper load capacity in a long time, though that was a big issue, especially when you're traveling on an airplane or something. I mean, what's interesting on that story, though, is that the brand story that was being told was a quantitative story,
right?
Quite literally.
Yeah.
And what was actually needed was this qualitative side. And so this brings me around, at least at the moment, to this notion of evidence and a qualitative investigation. So, I mean, maybe can you talk about, I guess when I think about that stuff, I'm thinking primarily of interviews or filming people in situ kind of thing.
Yep.
Are there... Yeah, what's the state? I don't even know actually what the state of sort of qualitative investigation of things is nowadays.
So there are some people doing some work that I find fascinating. We don't use these tools, but that are measuring emotion, measuring affect, and using technology to do that. What I've seen is that involves some sensors that make people self-conscious. And kind of turn the whole environment artificial. When we're getting after something much more natural.
Right.
When we get out and talk to people in their home, we prefer to talk to people in their homes,
right.
Because that is a presentation of self. And we can see gaps between what people say and how they behave. And we can point to something in the background and say, tell me about that. And get more personal stories about people's values that way.
Right, and so I guess what you're also playing on there is there's going to be one mystery is, I guess, the difference between people's impression of themselves or even the impression of how they do something and how it actually happens.
Yeah.
And I guess there's also this, even we see it in the survey work we do, of people wanting to say something. Like if you ask them, are you more willing to pay extra for the best solution in your space? And they'll say, oh, of course. Mm-hmm. And then... But salespeople will continually run against the price objection, for example.
Yeah.
So people have aspirational value that they'll kind of express in response to certain types of questions. And I guess part of the trick is how do you get around that and find out kind of what the reality is.
I mistrust questions about hypothetical dollars because you have an infinite supply of them.
Right.
And so you'll spend them like a drunken sailor.
Famously.
What we've done in situations like that is to try to make it seem as real as possible. So we developed a service with Audi called Audi On Demand, which was like a mobility offering that doesn't involve buying a car, but using a car that comes to you and gets picked up from you. We heard from people that they thought it was too expensive. And they told us that, frankly, because we showed them a pricing model. We didn't ask them how much would you spend. We said $220 a day. And when we were prototyping the service, we took their credit card. And we swiped it. We didn't actually make an impression or take a charge, but we wanted it to feel real to them. Mm-hmm. And we learned something really interesting that led to how we thought about the business, which is in post interviews, they were perfectly happy with the price because the experience was great. They were nervous about it in advance of having the experience, but afterwards they rationalized it. They told us a whole bunch of stuff that we didn't even ask them about. Well, my time is worth some money and you saved me something there, and I didn't include the $70 it takes me to get to the Oakland airport. And so really it's a wash and it's better, and so it's worth it. People make their decisions emotionally. They'll justify them rationally, but the reason why people choose is often emotional.
Right.
And qualitative evidence is how we get at that.
So I want to come back around to this notion of intelligence where we started.
Yeah.
Primarily because, or in part, because I'm fascinated by metaphors and how they end up maybe confining about how we think about things. So we have this notion of intelligence, and as I said, I even had some presupposition. I had assumptions about what intelligence meant. As I've thought about that more, I've started to question it. And when we talk about a company, what we're even calling this show, making your business more intelligent, one of the things I start worrying about is when we focus on this quantitative side, that we start losing the human side of this. And it even starts to emphasize certain values. Like you said, optimization.
Yeah.
I also think about efficiency. And in the business world, there's a very structured way of viewing things that prioritizes or privileges efficiency and optimization because, in a way, those are almost machinic values.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering what you think about that, and what's one then problem about thinking about intelligence in this almost engineering model of efficiency and optimization, and what an alternative might be, particularly if you started thinking about it from what humans actually care about. Because humans tend to care less about efficiency and optimization than they do about feeling good about themselves or whatever.
There's comfort in numbers. So I think we measure stuff with precision because we mistake it for accuracy. Those are not the same thing. A statistician knows that. But a number that is wrong to 4% margin of error but precise to a decimal place, 80 times more precise than it is accurate, feels like something I can make a decision on. And so it's a bit of a false comfort. The thing that it leaves out, I think, to help an organization be more intelligent, to recognize that there are, like for people, organizations can have multiple intelligences. And I'm thinking of, I think the classic example is Xerox PARC, which was at one time, probably by some definitions, the most intelligent organization. They invented things like nobody's business. But all of their ideas, they didn't know what to do with them. And other people came along and commercialized them and turned them into world-changing products. There's a lack of intelligence there. They lacked street smarts or whatever you want to call it. But intelligence that isn't about making the right decisions smartly, what's it for? And so I think a lot of quantitative intelligence is about making smart decisions, but there needs to be another lens to say which are the choices, what are the decisions we're making?
Right.
You think about how companies fall out of the Forbes 100 or whatever. Kodak with its commitment to film and its inability to see a different future. There's so many examples of very, very smart companies refusing to see things that didn't fit their worldview.
Right. And this actually brings up something that we were talking about before with this idea of intelligence versus desire, in the sense that what you had just said was, if I set myself a certain decision, there can be more or less intelligent ways for me to make that decision.
And even more so, I would say there's ample evidence for me to justify that decision.
Yes.
So regardless of what decision you've made, there's evidence to support it.
Right. But what people aren't thinking about is what is the right decision to be made. And that's actually, I was just talking to someone else about this, where they were saying, actually someone I just interviewed, they were talking about, well, you've got to have your AI strategy in place, and you really need to think of, you're going to be left behind if your company doesn't have an AI or machine learning strategy. And I was just talking to someone this afternoon who was kind of saying, like, well, that kind of puts the cart before the horse. What you really need to start with is, what am I trying to accomplish? So another way of putting it, what do I want? And then does it make sense for me to use AI or machine learning or something else to achieve that end? And that's where I feel like we have this focus on this data-driven quantitative intelligence, and we're not really thinking about how do I want intelligently, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think the most intelligent question we can ask with whatever tools and evidence we can marshal is why. Yeah. It's the question we ask most repeatedly on projects. Yeah. And it helps us figure out what to do. And it also helps us when we are later in a project when we're optimizing. And we have to make, value engineering type choices. Understanding why can help us make the best substitutes possible. We call it maintaining design intent. If you didn't do it this way, this is the best possible way to still serve those same goals and values.
Yeah, because I was thinking about this, I think, as I said before, like people talk about artificial intelligence, which is supposed to run things smartly, and I brought up the notion of, artificial desire. Like the humans are deciding what the artificial intelligence should care about. Right? And I guess maybe we get afraid if we get the notion that the AI suddenly has its own agenda and actually wants something. But without that wanting, it's kind of stupid in a way.
It's very weird that we never ask an AI why, but we ask it for stuff all the time. So we provide all the intention. They're just desire harvesters. Yes. I'm listening all the time to what you want. And the ground rules for the relationship are you tell me what you want. Yeah. And if I have a fulfillment capability on the back end, I'll bring it to your house.
Right. No, but it is funny that I was thinking when you said that before. In fact, if you ask Siri why, it can be getting frustrated pretty quickly. So I'm wondering too, so this also brings us back around to when I talk about the metaphors. People talk about how to make your business more intelligent, and there's a weird thing to me about that because it begs the question of what is a business for, and really even this theory oh my God, everyone's going to lose their job because of AI. Even that is a weird fear to me because it suddenly means that people no longer think of a business as for the humans working there or for the customers. Well, sometimes maybe for the customers they're serving, but never for the people working there. And then, in fact, people then are scrambling to answer this question that you pose in email. What are the humans for? Yeah. And I'm not always happy with the answers they're coming up with.
It's a really anxious question right now, like you're saying. Part of that anxiety comes from a legacy of treating employees as a cost center, not a value center. Yeah. And oftentimes organizations think that, well, if we can automate this, if we can give this job to a robot and eliminate those jobs, we save money. Yeah. But sometimes people need people. And it's usually when technology fails. So technology is not very good at recovery. One of the things we've learned a lot in working on delivering service ecosystems that have both roles for people and roles for computers is that people are for recovery. Sometimes you just, when you...
right, I want to talk to a person.
Give me a person. And digital systems are great for self-service, for when, clear skies, everything's going great. But it's not just that people are the backstop. There are situations when what you're going through wants to have a person be in the picture from the very beginning in a proactive way. We've done some work with a health insurer, helping a call center that used to be reactive. So it was not just customer care; it was angry customer care, because that's the point you've reached by the time you call. If there was a proactive model, talking to people about what it means to be diagnosed with cancer and how you're going to navigate this journey, or what it means to become a parent. It's not just, it's weird that in the medical space they call pregnancy an illness or a medical condition. It's a life change. You used to not have kids, and then you do all of a sudden, and you're a different person. That's some deeply human
ill
stuff.
Person.
Yeah. An ill person who will never sleep again.
No, it's interesting too, because when you said that technology is not very good at recovery, I was also thinking about how it's not very good. It's just not very flexible or adaptive. And I guess maybe that's the dream of certain types of artificial intelligence, that they will be able to adapt it. They'll be able to adapt to situations. I do question to a certain degree how far they're going to be able to adapt. But it's something that I've been noticing a lot with, the chatbots, that's on every website you go to now. And I ran into a thing today where if I clicked on something where I didn't realize it was taking me there. It said, learn more. And I clicked learn more. And of course, it didn't take me to a learn more page. It took me to set up a time to meet with me. And it was being run by a chatbot. And it said, hey, send me your email. We'll set up a time. And I said, and I tried to go back and I couldn't. You couldn't go back to the website. It actually took you to this standalone module, right? And so then I said to the chatbot, I just want to go back to the website. Of course, the chatbot said, I didn't quite get that. What's your email address? So it's this faux humanness. Oh, pardon me, I didn't hear you. But really it's saying there was no at and a period and whatever the character set was. You just threw at me human. I'm just going to keep pushing for the email address. And that's where people get so frustrated with technology. Especially, I think, part of the source of the frustration to me is where there's a faux humanity in it. That's especially with Siri. Oh, yeah, thank you. Like there's a conversationality, and yet as soon as you get to anything that falls outside the forks in the script, then it's like, sorry, I don't know anything about that. Let me look that up.
My personal version of a Turing test is a non sequitur. I can tell you, by the way, you should go see Roma in a movie theater. It's a phenomenal movie, and it doesn't translate probably to a TV or a laptop screen.
Okay, fair enough.
But if you were not human, you'd be so confused right now. Because that came out of left field.
Right, I know. It does not compute.
And the smaller the vocabulary that they have to process, the better. So a bot that gets you a pizza delivery feels more human than one that is potentially dealing with your health. Because the number of things that you might be talking about goes way up.
I did know on that front, and apropos of Turing tests, since we're going down the digressive non sequitur path, is that the one, no one's, I guess the closest they've come, or the way they've won in these Turing experiments is you pretend that you're not a native speaker. So they kind of so you account for the awkwardness in the way, or I didn't quite understand you by saying, well, I'm Russian, and you even misspell things a little bit. So it is funny, by making things more flawed, it can end up, intentionally flawed. Your brain starts accounting for the flaws, not in terms of, this is a stupid robot that doesn't understand me. Oh, poor person who doesn't speak English. I'll speak more slowly or something like that. So, but it's a kind of where, again, what's interesting to me is how in order to feign humanity, you have to adopt understandable flaws or comprehensible flaws in the way you're doing things.
It's similar, I think, to how I'm noticing with autonomous vehicles that technology that might kill you has to look cute, apparently. Has to be super adorable and harmless looking. Teddy bears on wheels. But one of the things that I find encouraging when we're talking about chatbots and this question of the uncanny valley, like, can they pass? I'm seeing that companies are voluntarily, or states are regulatory, putting in positions on, you have to announce yourself if you're a bot.
Yeah.
And I think that's really good, not in any dystopian like stopgap measure, but just as a company trying to deliver a good customer experience.
Mm-hmm.
You're also in the trust business,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually the bot will fail.
Right.
And the longer it goes before it fails, the worse that failure is going to feel
Right.
for the customer as a betrayal.
Right.
So don't even try to place that bet. The idea that you should try to pretend to pass as human when you're not,
Yeah.
it's not even a good idea, even if you could.
I know. I've learned that the hard way. So as we sort of round the bend here, I think, I guess, and I was in a recent conversation I had here on the show, I was getting kind of pessimistic about the future. And partly it was pessimistic about a future in which they say, well, all these jobs will go away, but then there'll be some other jobs for people. I was pessimistic about the notion that AI is being deployed to help companies be more intelligent as opposed to letting people be more intelligent.
Yeah.
Like, it's funny, we don't talk about that so much, about consumers becoming more intelligent. Or I was thinking, for example, why not develop an AI that would actually help an individual, make better life choices, or go through a job interview. Why couldn't you have an AI assistant while you were being interviewed so you could actually perform better in the interview? But I was also pessimistic about even our ability to project out what the future is going to be like. And, and this part of this is the kind of singularity notion that in the classic notion of the singularity, once AI attains kind of self-consciousness and becomes an actor like you and I, then beyond that point, we can't predict what the future is going to be like. Because now suddenly we have a competing intelligence in our ecosystem that didn't exist before. So I was just curious, are you pessimistic, optimistic, both about the intelligent future and everything that kind of the direction of things we've been talking about today?
I'm optimistic that reality is way farther off than we think.
Mm-hmm.
That it has a Zenos Paradox, like, you'll get halfway there and then repeat. You'll get halfway there and repeat.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a harder and harder to get to thing. To be honest, I can't remember if I'm pessimistic in the short term and optimistic in the long term, or the other way around. I know it's one or the other. I think I'm optimistic in the long term and pessimistic in the short term.
Yeah.
And that's based on an expectation that when we talk about the future, we talk about it like there's one thing. I think there's going to be a lot of different futures, and if anything makes me anxious about the futures is that they are going to fight with each other.
Right.
In some ways.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I could see that even what I was talking about before, you couldn't even – so once you have the idea on the table that an intelligent assistant isn't just stuff that someone's going to order, or a thing that's going to order things for you or anticipate some of your needs or book a flight for you, but could actually help you make decisions and navigate your day or even navigate interpersonal situations, that there's going to be a point where – just from a cost perspective, and it's just like when people talk about life extension therapies and stuff like that, suddenly there's going to be a class of people, let's face it, who haven't lost their jobs because of this stuff, who can afford, and actually it's going to enhance their performance and give them a competitive advantage that everyone else doesn't have, and it will just increase different kind of inequalities that we're wrestling with today. That's my brand of pessimism.
Something's got to give.
Yeah.
Like you can't throw everybody else out of the lifeboat and still have a society that works.
Right.
So I suspect, there will be changes to what a government thinks its responsibilities are. That's my hope.
Right.
Because we've been talking a lot about whether computer systems are truly intelligent or just really good at simulating it. I think the other thing to think about is, and we've talked about it a little bit, corporate intelligence. I don't agree with Mitt Romney that corporations are people too, but they do have a certain kind of intelligence, and I would say their moral intelligence right now is not at a peak.
Right.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah, no, I think there was a documentary recently which was basically looking at corporations as people and saying, well, if they are people, they're essentially psychopaths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
we're pretty good at long-term thinking. Corporations are not.
Right. But we're also, I mean, what's interesting to me, though, is, and again, when we talk about optimization and efficiency, what it also comes down to is kind of value selection. And also, because you used the phrase value engineering before, humans are also willing to make sacrifices and make decisions about sacrifices that are suboptimal. Yeah. And especially between two outcomes that might be suboptimal. I mean, speaking as a parent kind of thing. Yeah. And that's, that's the sort of thing. I don't know how you inject that into the machine if it's making decisions for you or becoming quasi-autonomous. How do you get it to even make a sacrificial decision for some higher value?
So the reading I've been doing about AI systems, some of the smarter people than me have been cautioning that the bias of the programmer will show up in the system.
Right.
It suggests that the values of a corporation will show up in the intelligent systems it produces.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, too, that even the values show up in the way people talk about the value of the systems they're putting out there. This is going to save you money, increase efficiency, optimize things, reduce whatever.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Toby. It's been really fascinating. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Next week, we'll be talking with Rachel Hoppe, principal and co-founder of the Community Roundtable. We'll be discussing metrics, engagement, and community management. You won't want to miss it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Intelligent Business Show. You can find this show on iTunes and Spotify, as well as on YouTube. And be sure to follow us on Twitter at Aberdeen_show. And if you want to know what's going on in your market space, be sure to check out Aberdeen.com.